Welcome to my podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? This is Debra Hamilton. This podcast will seek to define and explain this important question from multiple points of view. We will interview owners, breeders, caregivers, defenders, advocates, champions, and educators. The mission of my podcast is to seek and foster collaborative conversations where every point of view feels heard, acknowledged, and appreciated. I look forward to you joining me on this journey toward a better understanding of each other. It is possible to have an impossible conversation. It starts with listening for common ground first. I am so glad you're here listening in with me. Now let's see what my next guest has to say. Hi, it's Debra Hamilton, and you're on Why Do Pets Matter, the podcast. We are so glad you're here. Today, I am thrilled to have my South African colleague, Karis Nafte, here with me. She is a pet custody consultant, and you know how much I talk about pet custody and how, unfortunately, your pet doesn't hate your ex, as we all know. She is also a board of director on SOTA, which is the South African Dog Agility Association. She is training to be a mediator, so she and I, we're buds right there. She is doing what I did a few years ago, and hopefully I'll be able to refer people to her in South Africa when she is certified there. She is an animal behavior trainer. She's an animal behaviorist and also a trainer, because she comes in and helps you work through issues with your dog, which to me is the only way to help someone overcome an issue with their pet. And as I said, she's on the board of directors of the South African Dog Agility Association, but she's also an agility judge, which I am such a neophyte in agility. It's ridiculous, but I love agility, and having Irish setters, they love agility. I can only screw them up. So I'm hopeful that I will take some tidbits away from Karis on how to get a dog ready. And last but not least, the most fun. Now, some of you know my son, Drew, is an editor on Drunk History in LA. Well, Karis trains dogs for movies. She's what they call in South Africa a wrangler, but that's because she provides the animals and the safety of the animals who are performing in the movies. So without further ado, I am so grateful. Karis, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, thank you for having me, Debra. This is fabulous. I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you.
Well, we have talked a few times, and we have so much in common. And you're following me into that mediation realm where we learn how to talk to people who are in conflict. You'll probably be a little broader than me, but I certainly just do that little niche with animals. But having that practice as a pet custody consultant really makes us sort of kindred spirits. And I'm so glad that my audience is going to hear how this is dealt with over in South Africa. But before we get to that, I always have to ask the first question, which is, Karis, why do pets matter to you?
Well, I'm going to answer that with a sweet story, Debra. And Perfect. The sweet story is that the story of my childhood is that my first word wasn't even mom, it was doggy. Because from the first moment I have a memory, I have loved dogs and cats. And what was interesting in my growing up was I wasn't allowed to have dogs and cats because there were allergies in the family, and my parents didn't want dogs. And at the time, this was quite a trauma for me. But what that did is it made me feed my love of dogs in other ways. So I started a dog walking business when I was a kid. I read every single thing I could about dogs when I was a child. I was an expert in dog breeds by the time I was 12 years old. And then when I was 15, my parents said, okay, you can get a dog. And then the floodgates opened. And basically, I haven't looked back. And when I was 16, I was teaching puppy classes. I'd been hired at a dog training school. And my whole life since then has really revolved around animals and the people who have them. What I learned quite young after teaching puppy school and working with aggressive dogs and working with dogs is that you can have all the skill you want in the world with an animal, but it's the people that you actually have to communicate with. And And by sort of realizing that and broadening my broadening my opinion of owners who, like sometimes people buy the wrong dog. It happens. They get a breed that's not appropriate for them, or it was a gift that, there's a million reasons. And, for example, you can't judge people for that. You have to work with what you've got and how you can improve it and make it better. But to work with my clients without a sense of them feeling judged or belittled at all. It's like, and from that, I've worked all over the world, and I was born in Oregon, and then when I was 25, I moved to South Africa. And in South Africa, I have done wonderful things. I mean, this is a wild and wonderful country. I've worked with cheetahs and elephants and on film sets with all sorts of animals. But most of my work is with domestic animals and their owners. And that's really, it's not as glamorous as the cheetahs, but it's more satisfying because it can make a real difference there.
It's so interesting. You talked about this. There are many trainers who take the dog and train it for the owners. And I always find that to miss that link that you so eloquently put out there. It's about people communicating with each other to help the dog be its best self and to help the people be their best selves. So here you are, you have a pet owner who may or may not be having issues with their dog. And as you beautifully said, don't judge them, just help them. And maybe that help is, this is not the right dog for you, and let's see if we can find a new home or not. But to make sure that you give them all the tools they might not have to live peacefully with those dogs. So tell us, if you can, a few stories of dogs that, as a behaviorist, or cats, or birds or horses, whatever you have worked on, because I know you've worked on a number of them, that the owners probably had a good heart, probably thought this was the best dog for them, and then found themselves way in over their heads. And I think we've talked about this before, maybe, but you don't take the dogs away and train them. You work with the people because it's about the people being able to have the dog do it right, as opposed to you having the pet do it right.
Yeah. I mean, if I train the dog, it's going to listen to me. Because so my job really, I mean, it's my terrible cheesy joke, but I always tell my clients, well, I'm not a dog trainer. I'm a people trainer. I'm going to teach you how to train your dog. And then you and your dog will have that relationship where it works and you actually know how to communicate with them. And I don't even like training people's dogs too much because it also makes the people feel a little silly sometimes, because I've trained thousands of dogs. So of course I can train dogs to do a whole lot of cool things, but my job is not to show how special I am. The best definition I heard of a teacher, which I really believe, is that a good teacher makes the students think they figured it all out themselves.
I remember when you told me that, we were talking. It's like the perfect.
It's perfect. And so I see it with my agility students, because I teach agility classes, and sometimes they might have been making the same mistake many, many times. And if I'm smart in how I communicate something, they change their behavior because it occurred to them, not because I told them to, and then it actually sticks. But to go to your question, Debra, I mean, that's such a good question about, a lot of times dogs end up with the wrong owner for 1,000 million reasons. One of the most common, in the place where I live in South Africa, there are a lot of border collies. It's one of the most popular breeds. There's a lot of farms, and it's just it's sort of like the Labrador of where I live. I'll put it that way. And the misconception people have, because they just don't know, is they think smart dogs are good dogs, that somehow having a high degree of intelligence means that they will automatically be a good pet. And anyone who works with dogs knows the opposite is true. The smart dogs are the impossible dogs unless you work them. So I had a lovely woman, a sweet family who'd just been diagnosed with Parkinson's. She was an older woman, and her adult children wanted to make her feel better. And the family had never had a dog, but they decided to get her a puppy because this was very tragic for the family, and they bought her a border collie puppy, not understanding that a smart dog would be a tricky pet for her. And and she came through puppy school, and we worked with her. And eventually we very quietly, I let them come to their own conclusion. We found the dog a home on a sheep farm because it was just going to be impossible. But I couldn't tell them that in puppy school when they had an 8-week-old puppy, because all 8-week-old puppies are perfect. There's nothing wrong with an 8-week-old puppy. They're the best and the smartest, and they already come when you call, because all 8-week-old puppies come when you call. So that sort of thing I work with quite a lot. And, situations where I had another client last week. They had an Italian Mastiff that they bought. And one of the things I try to help people with in my animal behavior work is to sort of understand that a dog is like a piece of clay, but that clay is not limitless. So if you buy an Italian fighting dog, I cannot train it to be a golden retriever. Nobody can. It will always be an Italian fighting dog. So we have to work within the framework of this breed and manage him. And no, I can't promise you that he's going to become, because he's quite aggressive toward other dogs. And I said, realistically, this is not going to be a dog playing in the dog park. But let's work that you can take him for walks because they're devoted and they're not going to give the dog up, and they don't need to. But it's more about communicating what is realistic for this dog, because genetics, you can't argue with genetics, especially with those strong working breeds.
It's interesting you said that. So to go back to the older woman with the border collie puppy, had her family gone to maybe a border collie rescue, and gotten an older one, like an 8 or a 9-year-old one, where their motors are running sort of at 3 times normal speed as opposed to 10 times normal speed, that dog, first of all, she wouldn't have had to housebreak it. She could have come to you to train it to be a good companion for her. She wouldn't trip over it as easily, because we know 8-week-old puppies and above are incredible trip issues for older people. And they could have been seniors together. I find that when I talk to people, I often ask them, if you want a certain kind of dog and you're older, maybe look at that breed's rescue so that you can get a dog whose owner maybe died. It's a great dog, but its owner maybe died and didn't make any plans for it, so you might be able to get it. As far as the Mastiff, I hear you. There's a couple who walk their dog here in Pleasantville, and when you come upon them, they start yelling, "Stay away, stay away." And at first I was like taken aback because they were yelling. But like you have instructed the people with the Italian Mastiff, you need to be uber aware of what will trigger your dog. And if you want to keep him, which there's nothing to say you shouldn't, if you're willing to recognize that this dog has certain things you need to manage. And it's okay. So every time I see them, they wave now, and I turn around and go the other way, because I don't want them to have an issue with their dog. I certainly don't want our dogs to have an issue. And my dogs don't need to go that way. We can go around the other way. It's not a big deal. But to be able to manage that with yourself, and also manage that with people who are walking the street, it takes a lot of good mediation skills. And you obviously have them because you've been able to talk to people about, what really works for you and what really works for the dog. Because I always say the same thing you do. I can get a dog to do anything I want it to do. Doesn't matter. And I'll annoy the bejesus out of people because I can get their dog to sit. But it isn't about me, because I'm not living with the dog like you are. So you're helping people figure out how to have their dogs be good citizens, good companions, and maybe, like with the border collie who went to live on the farm, be aware that would be a better situation for them.
Yeah. And you're really right about the older dogs. And I always push older dog rescue, but it's such a challenge when you get, especially a family like this who have never had a dog, and the idea of a puppy is just impossible to attach that.
It's delicious.
It's delicious. And I have this too with parents who have a 2-year-old. It's like, oh, we've got a 2-year-old. Let's let them grow up together. And it is a nightmare. It is a nightmare because puppies, as we know, are just little alligators. They're walking teeth, and they bite and they chew, and they have to. All breeds. I mean, certain breeds obviously have more of a tendency to bite, but the child usually ends up scared of the puppy. The puppy ends up locked out of the room, and it becomes a really sad and frustrating situation. And that when I'm lucky enough for people to contact me first, I'm usually pretty good at articulating that in such a way that they will look at an older dog or wait until the child is older, because it's not as cute as it looks in the photos. It's bloody and it's sore, and the dog eats the child's toys and steals the food out of their hands.
And then there's surgery because it eats the child's toys. So that's the other big thing. I loved when you said every 8-week-old puppy sits and does everything and comes when you call. I often tell my owners, because I do sometimes breed my Irish setter puppies, and I keep them till 12 weeks. So I get them over the hump of, knowing going out to the bathroom and things like that. So you get a pretty good a starter dog. However, I usually say to them, they are going to be the perfect dog till they're 14 weeks old, and they know they have whittled their way into your heart, and then they're going to be a hellion. I said, so call me, because I will come and help you figure out how to gently guide this dog back from the dark side, which is where they go 2 weeks after you take them home.
Yep, they do. And they're the little puppies, they follow you because they're babies. So I don't like to make too many parallels between people and animals because it gets confusing. But the truth is they become teenagers. And like teenagers, they go, I don't want to follow my mom. When they're babies, they follow.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean they understand. They're not trained. They're just following their instinct. They're only trained if you can throw some food and call them off the food, then they're trained, but it never works with a puppy.
No.
So that's also, and also for first-time puppy owners, when they get their first puppy and it follows them, they often think, oh, my dog is already trained. And why wouldn't they think that? They don't know any better. It sure seems like it. But luckily I get a lot of people in puppy class who kind of get that real fast. And then they teach them how to come, which is great.
Yeah. It's really a mastering of the stages of puppyhood. And I'm sure if you can, recommends several books for people to read before they get a pet, after they get a pet, so that they know that there are these transitions that the puppy goes through. And you'll say, but wait a minute, last week they did it great, and this week they're giving me the paw. And we, as longtime dog owners, and I've trained a number of dogs to obedience titles, the paw is always in the ring. When you're competing, the paw always comes out, because if you don't make sure that you love them up and have them want to do it, if you're forcing them to do it, then they give you that paw at the most inopportune times.
Yes, absolutely. And my best story about that before we get to the pet custody. So I've got 4 dogs. I've got a Black Russian Terrier, I've got a miniature poodle, a border collie, and a cattle dog. And I do agility with everyone but the Black Russian. My cattle dog, however, loves my husband. He is my husband's dog. I've trained him, but his bond is with my husband. So when I take him to agility shows, I was in the ring with Sam, and we were mid-run, and he was going over the jumps. And just in that moment, my husband pulled up, and Sam heard his car and just ran off the course. This is a high level. This is a qualified many times over dog. But now, unfortunately, my husband's not allowed to watch him because I know Sam well enough. If my husband's not there, he is my dog. He's brilliant until he shows up, and then boop, he gives me the paw.
Yeah, it gives you the paw. I mean, it's great. And the other thing, before we go to pet custody, because this is really important too, because it's not about just having the 2-year-old and getting a puppy, but having a dog for many years, 4, 5, 6, 7, whatever, and then having children. I spent a great deal of my time educating people on how to introduce your baby to your pet, your longtime pet, because a lot of people, unfortunately, don't do it well, and the pet sometimes feels, like you said, you lock the puppy in a room because it's biting the baby. Well, people lock the dog in the room after it's been, the run of the house for 7 years because you have a baby, you don't want the germs. So how do you help people transition their dog from being an only child to having a sibling? Boy, that really is a human-animal bond.
That's a big question. Yeah. So I would say I'm going to split that into 2 answers. So I would separate that from any dog. If there's a dog with any sort of history of aggression or high prey drive, or, I work with dogs who kill cats, that sort of thing. I would put those dogs in a different category. That's more complicated. I don't want to sort of give simple advice for that.
Yeah.
For let's say a normal dog, it's Rover, who you've had, who's just a normal hairy slobbery dog, and he's fine, but he's still a dog. The first thing that I tell people is that the number one thing that I see a lot of my clients struggle with is once the baby's born, no one walks the dog anymore. And then the dogs get hyper and bored and frustrated and everything. Of course, I know, I have a child. We all know when you have a baby, the whole house becomes about the baby. And the tendency, because people often humanize their dogs a bit, is they think, oh, the dog's just jealous of the baby. And you know what? The dog's not jealous. The dog is really bored. The dog still needs to go for a run. So I tell people, be kind to yourself. Hire a dog walker for a month or make a plan so that the dog's exercise doesn't stop. That's on the one level. And then what I tell my clients to do when they first bring the baby home is the baby's swaddled and it's in, towels and things, but the dog has to smell it. And some moms get so nervous that instinct kicks in. Even if you've loved your dog forever, they get so protective of the baby. They kind of hold the baby up, like it's, and they don't want the dog to smell. And the dog knows something is there. And then when you're holding, if you pick a little dog up at the park, all the dogs jump. So if you're holding a baby up and sort of shouting, the dog is going to be frantic to go, what are you holding? What's that? So put the dog on a leash and have dad stand on the leash so that the dog is not able to jump. And then keeping the baby wrapped, you just basically stick the baby's bum in the dog's nose so he can smell it. This is through blankets, not a naked baby. And then you'll see the dog will smell it. And most dogs then are bored. They're like, well, that's not very interesting.
It's doing nothing useful for me.
Yeah. And most human moms, not dog moms, they get so scared of that. That's the moment that they get wrong, is they don't just let the dog see it. And what is it and smell it? There's a lot of different research about germs and pets, and being around dogs makes kids healthier and farm kids are healthier. So, I can't speak to that. Certainly with my own daughter, she's healthy as a horse and has always been with the dogs.
Right.
So if you're going to allow the dog into the baby's room, do it. If you know beforehand that you won't be able to live that, then you need to keep the dog out of that room well before the baby's there, so that the baby coming does not change the dog's whole life. You need to get those routines in place beforehand. So that's kind of a short little basic I can offer for that. Yeah.
That is so true. I have 2 sons and I had 9 dogs to bring each of them home. And I actually took a lot of time figuring out where the dogs could be so that there would be some safe space for the baby to be on the floor. As it turns out, I ended up survival of the fittest and put everybody together and just let them all figure it out. But most people aren't like me. But I have to tell you that I kept sending baby clothes home with my husband for the day or 2 that I was in the hospital, because it was the old days when they kept you a day or 2 and didn't throw you out 5 minutes after you have the baby. And my babies were, the dogs were allowed to go to the bassinet. They were allowed to sniff in the bassinet. They were allowed, one of them really loved the dirty diapers, which was terrible. But that's a whole nother story. But you're absolutely right. You need to set up the boundaries so that it's not associated with the baby. And you really need to give them the opportunity to smell it before you come home with it. That's really something that's really great. And you can do that. Just take one of those burping rags and send it home. And when I got home, I actually gave the baby to my husband, and I said hello to the dogs as if nothing had changed. And then I introduced the baby that they had been smelling for about a day or 2. And, knock on wood, they're Irish setters, so they sort of take new kids on the block easily. But this was not a transition. But you really have to be thoughtful. And I think that's the most important piece that you brought out. You have to be thoughtful about bringing this baby into the family like you would if you had an older sibling, setting them up for success.
Exactly. And the other thing I tell my pregnant moms, just as a little tip, because people are so worried that the dogs will wake up the baby. The baby is hearing the dog's bark in the womb. They can hear, it's like sound carries straight through. So they're quite used to that sound. So obviously, I mean, and there's a million opinions about sleeping and babies and all of that, but this is not an unusual sound to the baby. So if you get suddenly worried that it's going to scare the baby, or they're used to it. And if you now have allowed your dogs to bark and are now going to react manically and fearfully to try to stop the barking, that'll also upset the dog. So either find a different barking routine, get some help, or just don't worry about it because your kid's used to it. That was my attitude.
Absolutely. We have the same attitude. Now, to get to that last piece that I want to bring out to everyone who's listening to Why Do Pets Matter, you and I have talked about pet custody, and it is a pretty interesting experience to try to help people decide on custody, whether it's total custody with one person or shared custody. And how is your experience with helping people do this formed probably while you're studying mediation, but formed how you address it?
So I started doing this by accident. I was seeing clients who were calling me who had dogs with, the normal tricky behaviors I see, like dogs peeing inside or separation anxiety or chewing up the couch and, kind of everything you can think of. And I had this sort of run of dogs where I could trace the problem back to the fact that either the dogs are having shared custody and really not coping with moving between the houses. That happened quite a lot. Or where the husband, say, won custody because he had more money to fight the wife, in the legal front, the ex-wife, but he didn't actually want the dogs. Or the mother kept the dog and she's now sort of trying to mother 2 or 3 children by herself. And now she's got no time to walk the dog. And no one had really thought of that. There was just this idea that the dog has to go with the children. And it was made out of kindness, but it wasn't actually thought through of the family routine. And as I started seeing this and exploring, and when I grew up, my mother was a divorce mediator. So I kind of grew up in this world, and I was chatting to my mom, and I just sort of had this light bulb a couple of years ago. I was like, nobody's doing custody help beforehand. And so rather than coming in as a behaviorist, now I go in proactively with my behavior background so I can speak to the language of the cats and do parrots, a bit of everything, mostly dogs though, so that the right choice gets made from the animal's perspective. And that's really what I try to do is what is right for the animal. I'm with respect to all people involved and no, I'm really very neutral in that. But the one thing I'm not neutral on and that I share with people, I obviously don't make a decision, is for the animal, this will probably be the best decision. And then we just go through, and sometimes it's really lovely and sometimes it's just a heartbreak, because I do have people who kind of love the dog enough to let it go, because shared custody for some dogs, it just is stressful for them. I would say it's nothing that anyone can make a general statement about, but what I kind of look at is, what has the dog's background been? Has it had a troubled upbringing? Has there been abuse? Was it a rescue dog? Is this particular dog going to cope with change, or is it going to be really upsetting for the dog? And as far as sort of breed types go, when you do get, like let's say a purebred sort of dog, like we were talking about the Mastiff earlier, many breeds are quite genetically wired to bond with a house and some like a place, and this is like my area, and this is how they orient themselves in the world, think German Shepherdish sort of dogs, like this is their thing. And some dogs really bond with one person, and for them to go back and forth is just, it's not fair. And it's not very PC to say that, because I see shared custody kind of becoming, as people, this is a hairy subject, but as people sort of humanize their dogs and really refer to them as fur children and the fur babies, they're not children. They are dogs, they're not property either. I say that all the time. In my opinion, they need their own category. They're not humans. They're not children. They're not really property, even though they are property technically, but they're something else. And they have to be considered in that different way. So if the shared custody is going to stress the dog out, if you really love it, then maybe you need to let it stay with your ex and let it go for the dog's sake. Because I was saying about the fur kids, it's like, it's kind of becoming normal. It's like, okay, well, it's just shared custody and people agree to it beforehand without thinking, is this right for the dog?
Especially if there's a stressful relationship between people. So my basic quote is, unfortunately, your pet doesn't hate your ex, and they really don't. But sometimes they will thrive, as you said, in a certain place that they find their territory, in the person that they find as their friend. And I don't know about you, but I find it really difficult to get attorneys who are divorce attorneys to even ask about the pets. And
Yeah.
I've had a number of them come up to me and say, I cannot believe that we had an incredibly great divorce agreement going until we got to the pet, and then it blew up. I said, because like children, you need to address it up front. First thing, what's going on here? And I have to agree with you. So the life of the dog, and if you get a rescue or you get a puppy, how did that dog grow up? Who is the most influential in that dog? How does that dog deal with stress of change, stress of environment? And really, as you said, this is what I do too, and which is why we have so much in common. I'm there for the dog or the cat or the bird or the horse. What's going to work best for the animal? And let's try to take our needs out of the equation while we're trying to discuss what's best for the animal. And it's sometimes the stress that comes when I'm transitioning, when I'm helping people transition, the stress that comes when the dog goes from party A to party B really affects the dog. And so, having that conversation on how do you set up that transition, how do you make sure that that transition is smooth and that the dog is, or cat, is able to do it. And really, you probably do this as well. I revisit it every 3 months after an agreement is made. I only make an agreement for 3 months for the first year, because we have to come back and really examine how the pet is handling this new normal for them. And usually, and I'm sure you found this, people's need to be with the dog comes to a head after 3 to 6 months. And then they sometimes are more willing to let it go to the other party because, as you said, that mother with the kids, had she had the ability to revisit it at 3 and at 6 months, might have said, it's really overwhelming to me. And been able to feel good about and not guilty about finding a new situation, maybe giving it to her husband. I always hate when people like that, and hate's a strong word, but I really feel badly if I'm not able to enable the party who takes the dog to return the dog to the other party without the animosity and the name calling and the blah, 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 if it doesn't work out. I want to make sure that if, I separate from my husband and I take the dogs and the dogs really are miserable, that I offer them to my husband, who would be continuity to the dogs. And I know we've talked about this before. If you can't take care of the dogs, if you have an issue, don't put them to sleep, don't place them with somebody else, really have the opportunity to the first right of refusal to their other guardian.
Yeah. And you have to put that in place. And that does give a bit of peace of something. And like with the shared custody, like you said, if it's not, for some dogs it works and some owners, like if it's been a clean break and the dog is just like Mr. Cool and like nothing bothers me, it can really be fine. I find a lot of the problem is that there's such it's like a lack of peace in the separated couple. And so when they get the dog back, they're too emotional or they overfeed it. It's like what people, the same thing people do with children, or when they're getting ready to hand the dog over, they're stressed. And when then there's anger, and all these handoffs are so stressful for the dog. It's like a dog can't live like that. They don't know they don't know if the stress or the people angry at them. And you see I see all sorts of every kind of sad
itching, chewing, everything, defecating, peeing, everything, because the stress of the last 3 days before I transition from me to you, you get crazy, and the dog picks up on that, because that's why all of us have had such a great time. If we have animals, not a great time, but a less stressful time during this shelter in place, because we had animals that really sucked up all that negative energy. Imagine the PTSD they're going to be suffering in a few weeks after all this changes, because they've been sort of hands-on. But maybe we'll talk about that next time, Karis. I could talk to you forever, so we'll have to do this again very soon. I do want to go through the 3 things that I pulled out, which I have 20, but I'm going to just try to do 3. First of all, it's about training people how to communicate with their animals. Trainer can't train the dog. They have to train the people. And I think that's perfect. That is so where I am, because the animals pick up on your energy, on your information. And so as a animal behaviorist and a trainer, training the people is absolutely key. I thought you were perfect, because this is my big gig for trainers. Please do not judge the people you are training. They're doing the best they can. They did things in what they thought was the best manner. I loved when you said, I allow them to come to the solution on their own. I give them the assistance to figure out on their own that this dog, needs training, or needs this or needs that, or maybe needs to find a new home. And so that is perfect. If you can get somebody to say, Karis, I think that Fluffy would be better on a farm. Because like the older woman with the young border collie, it's not a failure. It's a recognition that the dog is not thriving. And that's not your fault, in that, you thought it would work and it didn't work. And maybe it would have worked if you'd gotten a senior dog. But don't judge them. Help them make the best decision for the pet. And then finally, when you're in pet custody, they aren't human children. They're still animals. They still react in ways that are inherent to them, because that's years of evolution. They react the way they're supposed to react, whether you're an Italian Mastiff, or you're a Border Collie, or you're an Irish Setter, or you're a Russian Terrier. You're going to react the way your DNA tells you to react, and being aware of that before you buy it, best. After you buy it, with the help of a really conscientious and conscious trainer, behaviorist, so that you can set that dog up for success. You might have to change the way you do it, but you have to set that dog up for success, whether you're, taking it for a walk and it might be not a good other dog walk, or a dog park dog, or if you're bringing a baby home. You want to set that dog up for success, and you can do that with someone like Karis, who is a behaviorist and a trainer, and helps people to really keep the dog, cat, bird, horse, focused, what's best for them. I hope you agree, Karis. Those are the 3 things that I think cover this discussion. And I know we have so many more. I'm so glad you came. I hope you had a good time.
I had a great time, and I look forward to the next one. We could talk for hours. This is fabulous, Debra.
And I can't wait to do that. Yes. I can't wait to do that, because, this is so important for people to hear, that not only, here in the, my hemisphere, but in your hemisphere, people are doing the same thing, having the same issues. And so we're bringing all those voices together to help everyone have a discussion on why do pets matter, because they really bring love and hope and enjoyment into a human's life.
Absolutely. It's wonderful. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you for coming. This is Debra Hamilton, and I'm speaking with my good friend, Karis Nafte. She is a pet custody consultant, and you can reach her at, where can they reach you, Karis?
So my website is KarisNafte.com, and it's at Karis Nafte on Instagram and Facebook as well.
Perfect. And we'll put that in the notes at the bottom as well. But everybody, keep in touch, stay together. Why do pets matter? Because they really bring joy and love into our lives. This is Debra Hamilton. I'm the host of Why Do Pets Matter? And stay tuned for our next podcast. You've been listening to the podcast, Why Do Pets Matter? This is Debra Hamilton. Do you have a great idea or guest or topic that you'd like me to cover? Write me at hamiltonlawandmediation.com or email me at whydopetsmatterpodcast@gmail.com. Until next week, our pets do matter. Thank you for being here with me.